24 races done, a new world champion crowned, and that only means one thing. It's time for my season review. So get ready, because you've been summoned to the steward's office. Hello everyone, and for one last time this year, welcome back to the steward's office. I'm Saira, and this week we are doing a season review. The 2025 F1 season is finally over, and this is also going to be my last episode of the year before I take a little bit of a break before coming back for the 2026 F1 season. And we have so much to get through. This season was the end of a regulation cycle. We saw a new world champion being crowned. We saw a lot of new rookies on the grid. We saw driver swaps going on in the early stages of the season and team principals leaving in the middle of it. There was just so much to wrap your heads around. Kind of hard to believe that it all happened in the space of 24 races. And let's be honest, when you're looking at the driver standings and the constructor standings, it never really tells you the full extent of what happened. So we're going to dive into it, starting with the early parts of the season. And I think a lot of us came into the season thinking that McLaren were going to be quite strong. They won the constructors in the previous year, but also Red Bull / Max Verstappen were also going to be quite strong and put up a challenge. For me personally, I thought Ferrari would have a little bit of hope. They didn't do too badly in the previous season, and I also thought, yeah, we're going to see the grid start to close up because it was the last year of this regulation cycle. Can I just say thank goodness it was the last year, because I don't think many people are upset that ground effect cars are leaving. But yeah, just sort of expecting the field to close up again, kind of like it did in 2021 before we came into this regulation cycle, where a lot of the teams would have figured out what makes the car quick with these regulations, how to make it work. And it kind of happened and kind of didn't, I guess. I think I was expecting it to close up a little bit more. I think it was really evident, though, that some of the teams really still hadn't figured out what was going on with ground effect cars. But I think what was really glaringly obvious was that McLaren was going to be quick and be the people to beat right at the start of the season. You could see that from testing going into the first couple of races. And I think with Red Bull, you could kind of see that they did have pace. And I think when it came to testing, people thought, okay, they've got more speed to show, but it wasn't really materializing. They did end up opting to swap Liam Lawson out of the seat into Visa Cash App RB and to move Yuki Tsunoda into that Red Bull seat. It was an insanely quick change from Red Bull, and I don't think a lot of us understood why they just didn't have Yuki in that seat from the start or give Liam a little bit more time in the car. Not that that really changed anything. I think there were fundamental issues with the car, and that was evident early on. Even though Max was putting in good results, it just didn't seem to be on par with the McLaren car. You could also kind of tell with Mercedes and Ferrari really early on that they hadn't made any massive leaps in terms of performance. They were kind of where they were the previous season. Actually, that's lies. Ferrari did seem worse. They had a disqualification, a double disqualification in only the second race of the season. And from that point onwards, it just went downhill for them. And I think part of that was because the disqualification they had in China was down to excessive plank wear. And it seemed from that point onwards, Ferrari had to raise the ride height of the car so they wouldn't get disqualified, but it did mean they were losing performance, and it just made them super slow. And for the midfield, when you're looking at the rest of the teams, really, they all seemed to be kind of where I expected them to be. They were all fighting. I think there was no clear front runner in the early parts of the season about who was going to lead that midfield pack. I think it's fair to say, though, that Aston Martin were struggling. They didn't seem like the clear front runner, and they had been over the past couple of seasons. They had been that front runner in that middle pack. Didn't seem to be the case in the early stages of this season. And then there was Alpine, which I can't say are in the midfield. They were literally lagging behind everyone, and that was really clear early on. And they were another team that had a really early driver swap. 5 races in, Jack Doohan was out of that seat and in came Franco Colapinto. To be fair, that news was pretty much rumoured. Immediately after Jack Doohan had signed his contract with Alpine, everyone kind of knew there was a 5-race clause in there, and yeah, Flavio Briatore chucked Jack Doohan out and then put Franco Colapinto in. Moving on to sort of middle going into the end of the season, though. Kicking off with Ferrari, and yeah, it just didn't get better for them. It never at any point looked like Ferrari had managed to unlock something in that car that was going to make it quicker. And it didn't matter how much Fred Vasseur came in to the media and said, nope, there is potential in this car. Just give us the time to unlock it. I think the drivers were really getting fed up at this point of hearing that word potential, and so were Ferrari fans and just F1 fans in general, because it was so clear that there was nothing else that car was going to be able to give. And then we found out towards the end of the season that by April, Ferrari had stopped developing the 2025 car and shifted all of their focus onto the 2026 car, which is absolutely fine, and I do understand why. But you could also tell that they had stopped developing that car because, yeah, performance did not get better at any point in the season, and they've actually walked away with no Grand Prix wins. They have one win in the form of a sprint in China from Lewis Hamilton, who took pole there as well for the sprint. But other than that, no Grand Prix wins, and I don't think at any point they necessarily looked close to a GP win either. And I think what we saw with Ferrari is that the drivers really started to lose morale. They were getting increasingly frustrated, and I think with Lewis, we know that he can be quite vocal in the media, and it's never anything super bad, but if he's unhappy, he'll tell people he's unhappy. With Charles and what we've seen in previous seasons of him with Ferrari, he is way more willing to take the blame on himself when there's something wrong. But I feel like by the time we hit the midpoint of this season, and I think when he could start to tell that, yeah, there weren't race wins on the cards and they were just kind of be battling with a lot of guys behind them that they thought they weren't going to have to fight with on track, I think it started to get to him, understandably, and he was way more vocal in the media about it. Looking at McLaren and Red Bull, though, I think by the time it got to the middle of the season, you could see that McLaren had the consistently good car. And Red Bull didn't. Red Bull had a car that could sometimes work, sometimes not. We'd hear a lot of radios, though, that Max wasn't happy, that he wasn't comfortable with the car. And I think in the early parts of the season, a lot of us thought teething problems that Red Bull will iron out because they've done it before. But as the races kept ticking by, it wasn't getting better for him. He was so unhappy with that car. And I don't think it was until towards the end of the season that Red Bull figured out something that made him happier with it. Or whether Max just figured out a better way to drive it, because he was not happy. Oscar, during that middle part of the season, though, just strung together such a good set of results. It was so impressive and consistent from him that, yeah, he was happily leading the championship. He had a great start to middle of the season. Australia was not so great for him, but carrying on from that, really consistent work from him. Going back a little bit to Ferrari for Lewis Hamilton, it did not get better in his new team, just like Ferrari did not get better this season, and there was increasing frustration from him. And I know part of him is saying that, yeah, it was coming to a new team with a completely different culture. The team is based in a different country than what he's been used to his entire F1 career. But I think part of it is also that car was just horrible to drive, and even Charles said that. On the flip side of that, though, for Carlos Sainz, who moved from Ferrari to Williams, it was a really hard start to the season for him, I think, but it seemed to sort of click middle-ish of the season. Things seemed to be getting better for him, and he ended up on the podium, he ended up with sprint podiums, he ended up qualifying in the top 5 for Grand Prix. Everything really slotted into place for him, and I think at that point it became car dependent on whether the Williams car liked the track or not. Other drivers towards the middle of the season, I mean, Kimi Antonelli had a horrific European leg of the F1 season. It was really bad for him. He had strings of DNFs, of no points finishes, and yeah, it was really difficult to watch. To be fair, Toto Wolff came out later and said, look, yeah, we needed to manage the press that he was doing better. There was a lot on his plate as an Italian driver, especially going to places like Monza and Imola. But I think Toto kind of realised, and the team realised, it is way too much for a rookie to be doing all of that media and all of that press on top of then trying to prepare for a race. So it did get better. After the Europe, things got a lot better for him, and you could see that upwards trajectory for him, but that European leg was a really hard watch for Kimi. I feel like it was kind of the reverse for Gabriel Bortoleto, because it was that European leg of the F1 season where Gabriel Bortoleto in the Sauber managed to make something click, and he had I wouldn't say struggled at the start of the season. I think he was having the start of a season that most rookies do have, but it just seemed like a switch had flicked when we got to the European leg, and he was doing so well. He was out qualifying Nico Hülkenberg, and it was so impressive to watch. But yeah, I think it wasn't just Ferrari around April. I think a lot of the teams around that midway point, just before summer break, had really stopped developing the cars. They bought a big upgrades package, or a somewhat substantial upgrades package, to one of the European races, and then after that it kind of just tapered off, and what we got with the cars is what we got. There wasn't a huge change in order other than some of the midfield teams. A lot of the focus did then shift to the 2026 season, understandably. With all of that going on, though, there were a few drivers that stood out this season. Let's just have a quick chat about them, right? My breakthrough driver of this F1 season has to be Isack Hadjar, who honestly was so impressive. He blew me away this season, and I think it's the same for a lot of people. He drove so well in that V-Carb car. He's now been promoted up to Red Bull, but it was just very impressive from him. The drives he did, the defending, the attacking, all of it, it was so impressive. So he is my breakthrough star. Driver under pressure, and nobody will, I think, really argue with me on this one. It was Yuki Tsunoda for the majority of this season, and yeah, he doesn't have a seat next year. He is the Red Bull test and reserve driver. He's still trying to make it onto the grid somehow in the future, but yeah, you could tell he was under a lot of pressure even when Christian Horner left, which I think was the race before summer break. Christian Horner ended up leaving Red Bull. And I think that alleviated some of the pressure, having Laurent Mekies come in, who he had worked with in V-Carb, but he still wasn't getting to grips with the car, and it doesn't matter who your team principal is. When your teammate is managing to consistently score points and is getting the majority of points in the Constructors Championship, there is going to be a large level of pressure put on you if you're not scoring any points in a weekend and can't qualify in the top 10. Quiet overachiever goes to another rookie. I think for me it has to be Gabriel Bortoleto, because okay, he wasn't on the top step of a podium or qualifying right at the front of the grid consistently or anything like that, but I think what he did show is that he could really go toe to toe against Nico Hülkenberg, who we know is such an amazing qualifying driver. Like, we saw it in the 2024 season, how well he can qualify on a car. But to see Gabby Bortoleto being able to out-qualify his teammate was really impressive. And I think he's just had a really good attitude as he's gone about F1 this year. So he is my quiet overachiever. There were two drivers that I think had a super disappointing season. Probably a couple more. I could definitely say a few more. But for me, it has to be Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton. For kind of the same and different reasons. For Lewis, I think we were all hoping for so much more from his first season in Ferrari. I think realistically it was never going to be super straightforward. Like I said, completely different culture, language, engine, everything was going to be different for him. But this was super disappointing for Lewis because, yeah, no podium, no pole, no nothing. He had the sprint pole and the sprint win, which are still good, don't get me wrong. But I think we were all hoping that there would be a little bit more, and I'm sure he was hoping for the same. So, yeah, disappointing season for him. And for Fernando Alonso, who registered 5 DNF this season, and gosh, he was down the radio complaining about the bad luck that he had this season, and he had awful luck this season, and I am praying 2026 goes better, because we've seen what happens when Fernando is given a car that can do well. I just don't know what happened with Aston Martin this year. It felt like a lot of steps back. There were races that I barely even remembered they were there because there was nothing going on with them. So yeah, Lewis and Fernando had quite disappointing seasons for me. And I think for all of the rookies, they had a really big learning curve this year, as to be expected. But I think two in particular had a lot. And one of them is Ollie Behrman in the Haas, who was like this close to a race ban. He is still on 10 penalty points, mind you, so I think there's a lot like he was probably going to be looking at in the off season about how to rectify those things. The other person is Franco Colapinto, and I guess he's kind of not a rookie. He did a fair few races with Williams last year, but he did get chucked into the Alpine this year, which is completely different machinery. We know the Alpine car is not great, and it hasn't been for not just this season, a couple of seasons. And he walked away with absolutely no points. And I think this season has been a massive learning curve for him on how to drive that Alpine car. And also to do pretty much a full season in F1. He did, 19 races in the end. Jack Doohan did the first 5. So, yeah, I think Colapinto probably more than Ollie Behrman. Big learning curve jumping into new machinery. Let's dive a little bit into both championships, though. And we'll go over the Constructors Championship because there wasn't as much drama there. It was really obvious early on that McLaren were going to win the Constructors Championship unless something drastic happened, which it didn't. They were in the lead by so much. They had an extremely quick car, an extremely strong pairing of drivers, which really benefited them at the end of the day. And yeah, it led them to a second consecutive World Championship, one of many that McLaren have won in their history. But yeah, it was impressive at how well they had designed this car and how dominant it had been. Like, some of the gaps they were winning by were really impressive. I am still shocked that Ferrari managed to stay in P2 in the Constructors Championship for as long as they did, given the performances that they had, because they weren't great. And they did end up finishing in P4, which I think is way more reflective of how Ferrari's season went, which wasn't great. They finished in P4. Mercedes were up in P2, and then we had Red Bull in P3. That P3 for Red Bull was Max Verstappen. Yes, there were a couple of points that came from his teammate, but realistically, a lot of the heavy lifting for that P3 came in the form of Max, and they were in P4 for quite a while. And then, yeah, obviously Ferrari just dropped off any kind of performance that they had, and Mercedes and Red Bull managed to scoop up really good points. Mercedes had multiple podiums. I mean, Max having the wins and the podiums throughout the season as well really helped. I do think P4 was way more reflective of Ferrari's performance this season. Absolutely no battle at the bottom of the table. Alpine, P10. Not a surprise, realistically. The car was awful. It was slow, it was not easy to drive, and they had to compete with Nolan for P10. P5 down to P9 though, a lot of swapping around. Williams finished in P5, which I think is the highest place they finished in the Constructors since 2017, I want to say, which is absolutely amazing for this team. They've worked so incredibly hard with James Vowles at the helm. Alex Albon has done a lot of work with that Williams since he has joined. Carlos Sainz coming in and fitting in so well with the team. It's paid off for them, and it is incredible to see, and I really hope we carry on seeing that in future seasons. Aston Martin, the DNFs did not help. They did not start that Lance Stroll had, did not help. And they were kind of just, it was an unknown entity for Aston Martin going into every single race this season. You never knew how they were going to do. For VCARB, I think a lot of it came down to whether the car suited the track they were at. And for Isak Hadjar in particular, if the car was suited to the track and they got it into the right setup window, he did amazingly. Liam Lawson, after coming out of Red Bull into VCARB, needed, I think, just that little bit of time to build up his confidence again. But when it did, it clicked for him and it went fairly well for him. I think he gained a lot more confidence and was able to put in the performances that had initially gotten him promoted to Red Bull. For the Drivers' Championship, though, we did get that battle right at the top of the championship with Lando Max and Oscar Piastri. And I know, guys, if you have listened to other podcast episodes of mine, you will know that there were multiple times in the season I ruled out Max Verstappen. Merciful me, I should not have done that. I did, and I generally did get to a point, not down to his driving, but more down to the Red Bull car, where I thought there is just no way that Max is going to be able to win the championship or be in that battle. But like I said, Red Bull managed to find something that really clicked into place, and it brought Max back into play. And when Max has a car that he's comfortable with, you have to watch your back. And let's be honest, things like papaya rules and the double disqualification in Las Vegas definitely helped Max to get his nose into that championship fight. But I can't lie, if I never hear about papaya rules again, I will be happy, because I know McLaren were trying to make things equal and fair between their drivers, and they were trying to be like, look, we're not causing issues between the drivers. Feel like it did end up causing issues. I would have just been like, look, bring the cars home and you can fight as you want, like, look, don't make contact with each other and don't do stupid things, but other than that, we're not gonna sort of play around in strategy. The person ahead will pit first as per usual. We're not playing these games about DRS and all the rest, because it never really helped me understand anything, right? The papaya rules thing, McLaren were by far the quickest car. They were always going to win the constructors. Like I said, it would have taken something massive for them not to do that. At that point, it really was the drivers trying to battle with each other. And I don't think that was handled well. The fact that Zach Brown at one point in the season was like, oh, I'd rather us not win the Drivers' Championship, or if we're not going to win it, I'd rather it go to Max, something like that, and about, I'd rather that and use the papaya rules, and I don't know, none of it made sense to me, I've got to be honest, and I really, really hope we don't hear about it again. So on McLaren's half, do I think that the championship could have been handled better? Yes. But here we are, and Lando still has his first World Championship, which is amazing for McLaren to also have the Drivers and the Constructors Championship. Oscar Piastri ended up finishing in 3rd place, which is gutting considering for how long he led that championship. I genuinely thought he was going to win it, but it was after his DNF in Azerbaijan that things started to go a little bit downhill for him, and he couldn't get a run of good, consistent results, and Lando Norris was. He capitalised on it. He was getting poles and wins and podiums and all the rest of it, whereas Oscar was really struggling with form for a good couple of races until right towards the end of the season. This whole season, though, has been just crazy when I look back on it like this. It is insane how much we went through this season. These set of regulations are coming to an end, though, like I mentioned. We have new engine regs coming in next season. We have new aero regs coming in. We have DRS leaving, we have active aerodynamics coming in. It is a huge change, and we're saying goodbye to this generation of car. Like I said, the ground effect era can go now. I'm done with it. I don't want it back. I'm really sorry. I think a lot of the drivers are happy that it's going. It was a difficult regulation era, I think, for a lot of the teams and drivers. But what was great about this season was seeing what midfield teams like Williams were capable of. I mean, Carlos Sainz getting a podium and qualifying within the top 5, and teams like VCARB with Isaac Hadjar managing to qualify so high up, staying those points during the race. It was so impressive to watch, and the hope is that it really does continue, because that's what makes F1 exciting. But no one's dominance ever lasts for long. We saw that with Max Verstappen's dominance when we came into the beginning of this regulation cycle, towards the middle of it, how McLaren sort of took that mantle. So we don't know what's going to happen next season. But for this season, for the teams, look, McLaren are walking away super happy with what they've got: a Drivers' Championship, a Constructors' Championship, and their other driver in 3rd place. So they're going into 2026 really confident. For Red Bull and Max, it's a slight bit of a mixed bag, but they obviously figured something out towards the end of the season that worked for them. So I don't think they're going to be disappointed. I think Max is fairly happy with P2, because I don't think a lot of us were necessarily expecting that, and for him to battle for that championship in Abu Dhabi. For Mercedes, I think they're going to be happy to say goodbye to this era of regulations. Ground effect never really fully worked for them, even though it was a pretty successful season for the team with multiple points, especially having a rookie driver in the car as well. Ferrari are going to want to forget this season. This is one of their worst seasons since 2020. They don't have a single win. So Ferrari just invited this season. I don't blame them. Williams, I think, are going to take a lot of hope from this season. I think they're going to feel more fired up. I think this was a really good motivational push for them to see those amazing qualifiers, to see the podium finish. I think this is gonna give them a lot of inspiration and motivation for the season ahead. I think same with VCARB. They finished on a really good foot. I think they should be really happy with the performances this season, especially with Isaac, who is a rookie. Aston Martin, I think, are just going to be hoping that Newey has worked some magic on the car and he is their team principal next year. So I think, kind of like Ferrari, this is a season they will want to forget. Sauber, I mean, it was their last year in Formula One. They become Audi Audi next year. The Sauber name is leaving F1, and I think they should be happy with it. Nico Hülkenberg's first podium ever. Gabriel Bortoleto putting in some brilliant performances. I think they should be happy with the way they've signed out of F1. Haas, I mean, mixed bag for them, but I think there was such good flashes of pace and performance from the team. And Ollie Behrman and Esteban Ocon seem to be a really good pairing, so I am excited to see how that goes going forward. And for Alpine, they're going to want to put this season in the bin. I don't think there is any other way to put it. They're going to want to put it in the bin, and I don't blame them. This was a horrific season by far. I mean, Franco Colapinto finished with absolutely no points. Pierre Gasly wasn't happy. They are switching over to the Mercedes engine next season. Maybe that'll bring a bit more performance. Let's hope so. But that is it. That is my season review. 2025 is done, and season 3 of the Steward's Office is also now complete. I can't believe it. Can't believe it's been 3 seasons of the podcast. But thank you guys so much for listening, not just to this episode, but to all the episodes this season, however many you've tuned into, whether you followed or not. Thank you so much for coming over and listening to me chat about F1. I am taking a break for a little bit now, spend time with family, rest and recoup over the festive period, ready for 2026 when we have 11 cars on the grid. I cannot wait to see that. 11 cars on the grid, Ford back on the grid with Red Bull. I mean, Honda's coming back with Aston Martin. It's gonna be super interesting. And of course, Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez making a comeback. But I will be chatting about all of that in the new year. On season 4 of the Steward's Office, we'll do a full season preview. But for now, thank you guys so much. And I hope you all have a wonderful festive season and a great new year. Diolch yn fawr, and I will see you guys the next time you're summoned to the Steward's Office.